I need you to stop scrolling right now and listen closely. There is a program, a resource, an entire pathway that thousands of veterans swear by. They tell their buddies, they post about it online, they find genuine camaraderie and critical support through it. And that is fantastic. We celebrate any veteran finding stability and healing. But here is the critical, painful truth that nobody talks about. Participation in this specific type of high-intensity support track, whether it's a nonprofit wellness retreat, a long-term substance abuse program, or even certain intensive VA mental health programs, might be actively, unintentionally dismantling your service-connected disability claim. It sounds counterintuitive, right? How can seeking help hurt your claim? Because the VA system is not a therapeutic system, it is a legal and bureaucratic compensation system. The evidence needed for healing is diametrically opposed to the evidence needed for a successful claim. We're not talking about just getting denied, we're talking about generating negative evidence that can take years, even decades, to overcome. If you are currently in one of these supportive pathways, or if you are considering one, you need to understand the 7 critical ways that seeking help can unintentionally devastate your pursuit of the compensation you earned. This isn't about discouraging treatment. It's about providing the critical battle plan to protect your claim while you heal. This is the conversation your service officer should be having with you, but often doesn't, because the focus is on immediate relief, not long-term legal strategy. The first and perhaps most insidious problem is the documentation trap. Why feeling better looks bad on paper. When you enter a support program, especially those focused on immediate stabilization or recovery, the entire goal of the staff is to document your progress. They are looking for markers of success, improvements in coping mechanisms, and decreases in acute distress. This is a good thing for you as a person, but it creates a massive evidentiary problem for your claim. Think about the VA rating schedule. Ratings are based on the severity and frequency of symptoms. A 70% rating for mental health, for example, requires impairment in occupational and social functioning with deficiencies in most areas. If your program notes repeatedly state, veteran reports increased ability to manage stressors, or veteran is engaging in group activities with appropriate affect, or veteran states they feel stable and ready to transition back to work, those notes are immediately weaponized against your claim. The VA rater who has never met you and is simply reading a file sees a pattern of improvement. They don't see the underlying chronic condition. They see the temporary, program-induced stability. They conclude that your current level of functioning does not meet the criteria for the higher rating you are seeking. Let's dive deep into this specific documentation issue because it's where most veterans trip up. When you are in a therapeutic setting, you're encouraged to use positive language, to focus on the future, and to demonstrate resilience. That's the therapeutic imperative. But the VA compensation imperative requires you to document the current functional limitations imposed by your service-connected condition. Imagine a veteran, let's call him Mark, who is seeking an increase from 50% to 70% for PTSD. Mark attends a 3-month intensive outpatient program. In week 6, the therapist asks Mark how he feels about going back to school. Mark, feeling motivated by the group dynamic, says, "I think I could manage 2 classes." The therapist notes this. Veteran expresses optimism about future educational goals, showing improved motivation. When the VA rater sees this note, they don't see the underlying anxiety Mark still faces. They see a veteran planning for the future, which contradicts the definition of severe occupational impairment required for 70%. The program documentation often focuses on potential bars rather than current reality. The notes might also inadvertently minimize the chronic nature of the disability. If a veteran has a period of stability, the notes reflect that stability. If the veteran has an episode of acute distress after the program ends, the VA often discounts it, arguing the program was successful and the subsequent distress is due to a new, non-service-connected stressor, rather than the chronic waxing and waning nature of the underlying condition. We must understand that the VA's goal is to justify the lowest possible rating consistent with the evidence. If the evidence provided by your own treatment team suggests improvement, the VA will seize on it. This trap is especially dangerous because you want to be honest with your therapist. You should be honest, but you must mentally separate the therapeutic conversation from the legal claim documentation. You need to ensure that while documenting progress, the records also clearly articulate the residual limitations that persist even during periods of stability. For instance, instead of just noting, "Veteran is managing stress better," the note needs to add, "but still requires intensive daily structure and avoidance of crowded public spaces to maintain this level of functioning." Without that crucial context, the positive documentation becomes a weapon against your compensation. This is why having a robust external strategy, like an independent medical opinion or detailed buddy statements, is essential to counterbalance the inherent optimism built into therapeutic program documentation. If you spend time detailing how you are learning to cope, the VA will interpret coping as cured or significantly improved, completely ignoring the massive effort and continued sacrifice required just to achieve that baseline stability. This documentation trap alone is responsible for thousands of unwarranted denials every year, simply because the language of healing is not the language of disability compensation. Moving to the second major pitfall, we confront the nexus breakdown, focusing on symptoms, ignoring service connection. Many of these highly praised veteran programs are run by incredible people, often veterans themselves, but they are focused on wellness and healing, not VA law. Their documentation priority is treating the current symptoms, not tracing the etiology of those symptoms back to military service. The VA compensation claim hinges entirely on the concept of nexus, the link between your current disability and an event, injury, or exposure during your active duty service. If your service-connected claim is still pending, or if you are seeking a secondary service connection, the records generated by these programs might be completely silent on the nexus. In fact, they might inadvertently introduce alternative etiologies. Let's take the example of chronic pain. A veteran is seeking service connection for chronic back pain. They attend a specialized pain management program. The program notes focus heavily on the veteran's current lifestyle, weight, and history of physical activity. Since separation, the doctor running the program notes, patient's pain is exacerbated by sedentary lifestyle and obesity. Treatment plan focuses on weight loss and physical therapy. While this is excellent medical advice, the VA rater reads this and thinks, the pain is caused by post-service lifestyle factors, not the in-service injury. The program, in its attempt to provide holistic care, has introduced a non-service connected etiology that the VA will use to deny the claim. The rater is trained to look for any plausible alternative cause. If the program notes suggest the condition is primarily related to civilian stressors, genetics, or post-service lifestyle, the rater is legally justified in denying the claim for lack of nexus. Furthermore, if you are claiming a secondary condition, say chronic depression secondary to chronic pain, the program might document the depression thoroughly but fail to draw the line back to the primary service-connected condition. They treat the depression as a standalone issue. If the records don't explicitly state, the patient's current severe depressive symptoms are directly related to the chronic unremitting pain stemming from their documented service-connected back injury, the nexus for the secondary claim is broken. The VA is not required to connect the dots for you. You must provide the dots already connected. These wellness programs, while invaluable for recovery, rarely employ staff trained in the specific legal requirements of 38 U.S.C. and 38 CFR. They are focused on the DSM-5 and therapeutic interventions, not the M21-1 adjudication manual. To counter this, if you are participating in such a program, you must take proactive steps to ensure the nexus is preserved. This means providing your program providers with detailed information about your service injury and explicitly asking them to include language that links the current severity of the condition back to the service event. If they refuse or are uncomfortable, you need to recognize that their records will be neutral at best and actively harmful at worst regarding the nexus requirement, necessitating the heavy use of external VA-savvy experts like private physicians or IMO providers. The focus on immediate wellness often means that the foundational requirement of the claim, the service connection, is completely overlooked, leaving the veteran with great treatment records but a fatally flawed legal case. The third issue is the misdiagnosis maze, when treatment records don't match the claimed disability. This happens frequently, especially with complex decreased mental health claims. Veterans often file a claim based on a diagnosis they received years ago, perhaps during separation. They enter a new, highly specialized support program, and the new clinicians, performing a deep dive assessment, refine or change the diagnosis entirely. For example, a veteran might be claiming service connection for major depressive disorder, MDD. They enter a program that specializes in complex trauma, and the program determines the MDD is actually a manifestation of persistent depressive disorder, PDD, or perhaps a comorbid diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, BPD, or an anxiety disorder. Again, medically, this is often a better, more accurate diagnosis. But bureaucratically, it creates chaos. When the VA rater receives the treatment record showing a new, different diagnosis, they face a conflict. If the new diagnosis is not explicitly linked back to the original service-connected stressor, the rater can argue that the original claim for MDD is not substantiated by the current evidence. Furthermore, some diagnoses carry a heavier weight of stigma or complex etiology in the VA system, like BPD, which the VA often tries to attribute to pre-service personality traits, making service connection extremely difficult. If the program introduces a new, challenging diagnosis without a clear and strong nexus statement, the veteran is suddenly fighting two battles, proving the service connection for the original condition and explaining why the new diagnosis, which is often more severe, is also connected. This is amplified when veterans are participating in programs dealing with substance use disorder, SUD. While SUD can be service-connected, either primarily or secondarily to a mental health condition, the program's focus on the addiction itself can overshadow the underlying mental health condition that drove the addiction. If the records only focus on the SUD and the veteran's recovery journey, the VA may rate the SUD separately, or worse, argue that the mental health symptoms are merely residual effects of the substance abuse, rather than the primary service-connected condition. This diagnostic drift is a major hazard. The veteran needs to ensure that if a new diagnosis is assigned, the treating physician provides a clear written statement confirming that the symptoms leading to the new diagnosis are the same symptoms that were present during service, and that the new diagnosis is simply a refinement of the original service-connected condition. If this is not done, the VA will treat the new diagnosis as a completely separate, non-service-connected condition, forcing the veteran to start the entire claim process over, often with more complex evidentiary requirements. The misdiagnosis maze highlights the need for veterans to maintain absolute consistency in their claimed condition, or, if the diagnosis changes, to immediately seek expert legal guidance on how to amend the claim to incorporate the new, more accurate diagnostic picture without sacrificing the established connection to service. The fourth devastating outcome is The lack of continuity. Illusion, gaps in treatment due to program participation. While participating in a residential or intensive outpatient program, veterans often pause their regular ongoing outpatient treatment, the weekly therapy sessions, the monthly psychiatry appointments, the regular physical therapy. This creates a gap in the continuity of care documentation. For a VA claim, especially an increase claim, continuity of treatment is paramount. It demonstrates the chronic, persistent nature of the disability. The VA looks for a sustained pattern of treatment over time. If a veteran enters a 3-month residential program and stops seeing their regular providers, the VA rater may see a treatment gap in the regular records. Even though the veteran was receiving more intensive treatment during that time, the records from the specialized program might not be easily integrated or accessible to the VA, or they might be filed under a different medical system. The rater sees no treatment documented between January and April. This gap is interpreted as a period of remission or stability, undermining the argument that the condition has worsened or remained chronically severe. The rater thinks, if the condition was truly severe, why did they stop seeing their regular doctor for 3 months? This illusion of a break in care is a bureaucratic formality, but it carries immense weight. To combat this, the veteran must ensure 2 things. First, that their regular providers are aware of the intensive program and document this transfer of care in their own notes. Patient is temporarily pausing treatment to attend Program X. Records from Program X will be requested upon completion. Second, the records from the intensive program must be meticulously gathered and submitted to the VA as part of the continuity evidence. They must clearly state the intensity of the treatment received, proving that the veteran was not in remission, but rather was in a state requiring higher levels of intervention. If the veteran fails to provide these comprehensive records, the VA will rely solely on the gap in the standard outpatient notes, concluding that the veteran's impairment level must have decreased during that period. This is particularly relevant for mental health claims where the VA is often skeptical of long-term, sustained severity. Any perceived break in treatment is seized upon as evidence of improvement. The intensive program is supposed to be the solution to the lack of continuity, but if the paperwork isn't flawless, it becomes the cause of the perceived gap, leading to a denial based on insufficient evidence of chronic severity. The 5th critical issue, and one that is deeply rooted in the psychology of recovery, is the intentional omission. Why vets downplay symptoms in group settings. When a veteran is in a group therapy setting or a peer support program, the environment is designed for mutual encouragement and accountability. There is a strong social pressure to demonstrate progress, resilience, and strength. Veterans, being who they are inherently reluctant to show weakness or burden their peers with the full, unfiltered severity of their struggles. This leads to intentional omission or minimization of symptoms during recorded group discussions or one-on-one check-ins. If a therapist asks, "How many panic attacks did you have this week?" the veteran might say, "Just one bad one," when in reality they had 3 severe attacks and 2 mild ones, but they don't want to sound like the worst person in the group. This minimization is then documented. Veteran reports minimal episodes of acute anxiety this week. This record is now evidence. This documented minimization directly contradicts the testimony the veteran will later provide during their compensation and pension (C&P) exam, where they are encouraged to be fully forthcoming about the severity of their symptoms to justify a higher rating. The VA rater compares the C&P testimony, "I have debilitating panic attacks almost daily," with the program notes, "Veteran reports minimal episodes of acute anxiety." The rater immediately flags this as a credibility issue. They ask, is the veteran exaggerating for the C&P exam, or were they lying to their therapist? Either way, the veteran's credibility is damaged, and the claim is likely to be denied or rated lower. The VA operates on the principle of benefit of the doubt, but that benefit is revoked the moment they find contradictory evidence that suggests exaggeration or dishonesty. This intentional omission is not malicious. It is a natural human response to a supportive, peer-driven environment. But the VA doesn't care about the therapeutic context. They only care about the written evidence. To mitigate this, veterans must be hyper-aware of what they say and how it is documented. They must learn to articulate their progress alongside their persistent limitations. For example, instead of just saying, "I had a good week," the veteran must say, "I had a good week because I stayed home and avoided all triggers. But if I had to go to the grocery store, I would have had a severe reaction." This ensures the documentation reflects the effort required to achieve stability, rather than assuming stability is the baseline. The pressure to perform well in a therapeutic program is a massive hidden threat to the integrity of the claim documentation, turning supportive notes into skeptical evidence for the VA rater. Sixth, we encounter the C&P conflict, how program records contradict your exam testimony. This is the culmination of the previous 5 points. The compensation and pension C&P exam is arguably the single most important piece of evidence in your claim. It is your one chance to articulate the full scope and severity of your disability to a VA contracted examiner. If you have just come out of a high-intensity support program, you are likely in a state of temporary, heightened stability. You might be feeling better, more motivated, and more articulate. This temporary improvement, coupled with the documented minimization from the program, creates a perfect storm for a C&P conflict. When you sit down with the examiner, they have already reviewed your file, including all those positive, forward-looking notes from the program. If you testify that you can't hold a job, but the program notes from last month state you were actively developing a resume and expressing readiness for vocational rehabilitation, the examiner is forced to choose which evidence is more compelling. Often, they will lean toward the documented records over the veteran's current testimony, especially if the veteran appears outwardly stable during the brief examination. The C&P examiner's job is to reconcile all the evidence. If the program record suggests that your condition is well controlled or managed with minimal impairment, the examiner is likely to conclude that the current symptoms you describe are either exaggerated or not severe enough to warrant the rating you seek. This conflict is particularly dangerous because the C&P examiner often has specific training in identifying malingering or exaggeration, and the discrepancy between the optimistic program notes and the severe C&P testimony provides the perfect justification for the examiner to assign a low rating or even deny service connection based on a lack of credibility. Furthermore, if the program was designed to teach coping skills, the C&P examiner might note, "Veteran exhibits excellent coping skills learned during Program X. Symptoms are present but manageable through learned techniques." While this sounds positive, it directly undermines the severity criteria for higher ratings, which often require evidence of inability to function despite treatment. The program records intended to support your journey to wellness become the primary tool used by the VA to argue that your condition is not functionally debilitating. To survive the C&P exam after completing one of these programs, you must focus your testimony not on the skills you learned, but on the effort and limitations required to use those skills. You must explain that the stability achieved in the program setting is not sustainable in the real world without intense, ongoing effort and avoidance of normal life activities. The C&P examiner must understand that the program provided a temporary, highly structured bubble, and that outside that bubble, the chronic symptoms return to baseline severity. Failure to articulate this distinction turns positive treatment records into negative legal evidence. Finally, the seventh critical danger is The independent medical opinion, IMO. Dilemma: when program vets don't support the need for one. An independent medical opinion, or IMO, is often the gold standard for breaking through a stalled or denied claim. It provides clear nexus, severity, and critique of previous VA errors, all delivered by a private expert who understands VA law. However, if a veteran has extensive documentation from a supportive program, they may mistakenly believe that this overwhelming volume of treatment records negates the need for an expensive IMO. They think, "I have 500 pages of notes from this highly respected program. Surely the VA will accept this evidence." This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the VA's evidentiary requirements. Program records document treatment. An IMO documents legal opinion. The program records may prove you have a condition and that you sought help, but they almost never contain the specific legal language required by the VA, the "at least as likely as not" phrasing, the detailed critique of the C&P exam, or the explicit nexus statement linking the current severity to service. In fact, if the program records contain the pitfalls we discussed, documented improvement, minimization of symptoms, or diagnostic drift, the IMO becomes more necessary, not less. The IMO physician must specifically address and neutralize the negative evidence generated by the program. They must review the program records and explain why the documented improvement was temporary or why the new diagnosis is still service-connected. If the veteran relies solely on the program records, the VA will simply point to the negative evidence within those records to justify a denial, arguing that the veteran failed to provide competent medical evidence linking the severity of the claim to the service event. The program records, while therapeutically rich, are often legally deficient. The dilemma is that the veteran, exhausted from the intensive program, is often financially and mentally drained, making the pursuit of an IMO seem overwhelming. But for complex claims, especially those involving mental health or chronic pain, the IMO is the necessary bridge between the language of healing, used by the program, and the language of compensation, used by the VA. Never assume that volume of treatment records equals legal sufficiency. If your claim is complex, the IMO is the strategic countermeasure needed to protect your claim from the unintentional damage caused by the supportive program's documentation. So, where does this leave you? I want to be absolutely clear. You must seek help. Your health, your stability, your family's future all depend on your willingness to engage in treatment. But you must enter these programs with your eyes wide open, understanding that the documentation generated during your healing journey will be used as evidence in your legal battle. The VA system is not designed to reward healing. It is designed to compensate for functional limitation. To successfully navigate both paths, healing and compensation, you must implement a dual strategy. First, maintain rigorous communication with your regular VA or private claims savvy providers before, during, and after the intensive program. Ensure they document the need for the intensive program, proving the severity of your condition, and then document the residual limitations that persist after the program ends. Second, if you are asked about your progress in a program setting, be honest, but be specific about the context. Instead of saying, "I feel great," say, "I feel stable within this highly structured environment, but my chronic avoidance of crowds and need for constant vigilance remains." Always tie your progress back to the massive effort and continued limitations required to achieve that stability. Third, recognize that these treatment records are just one piece of the puzzle. They are not a substitute for robust nexus evidence. Be prepared to invest in a strong independent medical opinion to proactively neutralize any positive or contradictory evidence that may have inadvertently been created during your therapeutic progress. The program's veterans swear by offer hope, community, and vital skills. But the VA claim process is a separate, cold, legal machine. Do not let your journey toward recovery become the reason your claim for compensation is denied. Protect your documentation, understand the difference between therapeutic language and legal evidence, and always, always remember that seeking help should never cost you the compensation you earn through your service and sacrifice. The fight for healing and the fight for your claim must be fought simultaneously, but with two entirely different sets of rules. Now go get the help you need, but do it with a strategy that protects your future.